All right, welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. I have Chief Wegner from Painesville PD. He has 27 years experience in law enforcement, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation. So welcome to the show, Chief Wegner. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paige. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Of course, you are in your 27th year,
Correct.
and you've been a chief for 13 years.
Correct.
So almost half of your career has been in the chief position, which I think is really unique, is it not?
I think so, but I started this career young. I was 20 years old when I started, so it took it took some time to get to this point, but I worked to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And I would love if you can give some background into the 27 years. Why law enforcement? What did those 27 years look like for you? Maybe just some background.
Yeah, so when I was growing up, this was really a decision about being able to do something that could have an impact, make a difference within a community. It was something different every day. I'm not generally the type of person that can just sit behind a desk and um, just do the exact same thing day in and day out. While a lot of time I spend behind the desk now in my current role, coming up through the profession, that's not where I wanted to be. I wanted something that gave me the ability to interact with people, the ability to experience and make a difference in people's lives as best as we could and as best as I could. So I've worked in small towns my whole life. I started out working for a community just outside of my hometown, worked there part time, went on to a correctional officer position for a little over a half a year. And then from there, it's been towns of anywhere between 700 people to 2,500. Right now, Painesville is a little over 2,500 people. And to me, I kind of like the small town feel. Gives you the ability to get to know people a little bit more, be able to have maybe a little bit greater impact on your community and on the lives of the people in your community.
You think that you always wanted to be in leadership? Did you always want to be a chief, or do you think that just happened organically and, just rose through the ranks naturally?
So I can't say I ever necessarily wanted to be in leadership.
Yeah.
The This would be my second full time job I had in law enforcement. Was with the Medilia Police Department. I walked in there and my boss is like, "Just think, 10 years from now, you can be the chief of police." And I'm like, I looked at him and I'm like, "You're nuts. That's not what I want to do." I enjoy working the road. I was also 21 years old, maybe 20, was it 21, 22 at that time. And it's like, that was the furthest thing from my mind is ever being in leadership. As time went by, my focus really turned to wanting to be able to have an impact on the next generation of law enforcement. I was a sergeant in the Medilia Police Department at that time. My buddy, who's currently the chief there, and we kind of came up through that department at the same time. He got the chief's job. I got second place and got the sergeant's position. Um, but I really had this goal of I wanted to be able to lead in that role, not really sitting behind, say, that leader. I wanted to be able to have a greater impact, which is when I started looking outside and trying to find that role in leadership to where I could have that impact on the next generation. So.
Yeah, and I know in speaking to a lot of different leaders in law enforcement, there's kind of this mentality of like, I don't want them to have to go through what I went through, and I want to leave it better than I found it. What are some of the things that maybe you experienced throughout your career that you're hoping, the next generation might not have to?
I think probably the biggest thing is what I'm hoping, and I don't know if there's really anything I can do to change this.
Mm.
Is I want not just the officers, but the community as a whole to understand and see law enforcement for what it is. I when I started this career, kind of from that generation of the suck it up buttercup type thing. You didn't show weakness. Uh, you didn't let people know that you were struggling with anything. And as time has gone by, as things have, kind of materialized, as I've dealt with different things within our agency here, um, it really kind of came to light really that um, we really have to take a different approach to what we're doing. I will tell you when I started this job that in Paynesville here that I probably still had a little bit of that mindset, but I've watched officers throughout the course of their career struggle, and through some of those struggles, kind of realize that okay, we've got to do something a little bit different. So for me, it's kind of more about getting officers to understand that being vulnerable is not an issue, getting the community to understand that we're not robots, we're not people who have no emotions. That we do, we're no different than them. We've just chosen a profession that puts us in a place to um, try and help them work through some of their worst times.
Yeah. And I appreciate that reminder because I do think that obviously you guys do extraordinary things every day. But to think that you're not human and that those things that you see throughout your career aren't going to affect you is so unrealistic. And I hope that there is more empathy and understanding in that space too, because I think that it's a partnership, like you want to be there for your community and have empathy for the things that they're going through because they're calling you on their worst days. And it's usually not a fun time for them. And so you having the ability to have empathy for them and their situation, but then having that partnership where they also have that same empathy and understanding for you guys.
Correct, and I agree. And what I think is hard for people to understand is we may be responding to them um, on their worst day, but they're assuming we're on our best day and
Mm,
not on our worst day. So, you think back to just your own life in general and think of those times when maybe it's been a really bad day and how the littlest things snap. And I think at times there can be a lack of understanding of that. I'm calling for help, but at the same time, I'm expecting somebody who is having zero issues right now to show up. And so there gets to be a lot of misconceptions, if somebody has maybe a little bit of an attitude or something like that. So, if we can get a little bit of understanding out there about that, um, it helps a little bit. It helps the guys and gals that are out there, working the streets, serving those people. And it helps, it helps, I think, that general relationship between the two that much more. So,
yeah. And we know that that's an important relationship for you guys to have. And it's important, for you to have community support. And it's important for the community to feel like you're there for them when they need you as well. I know that you said that, throughout your career that, you've seen people struggle and obviously you've experienced it yourself. We talked a little bit offline and you explained that usually the time frame for burnout is every 3 to 5 years. Can you give a little bit more explanation into what you're seeing in that kind of time frame and why?
yeah. So what I've seen over the course of my career is, you get that new officer in, and working in small towns, we're not getting the veteran officers, right? We're not getting people with 10, 15 years of experience, generally speaking, coming into our departments wanting to, finish out their career, anything like that. We're getting the kids right out of school, those that are eager to get out there, do the job. So we're getting the new guys, right? And what happens is they get going, they get through their FTO, they take that stress off, right? They made their FTO process and they're finally out on the street on their own. They got rid of, their field training officer and they're starting to get their feet wet. And as time goes by, as we start to hit that 2 to 3 year window, they're starting to get to experience, especially in a small town, they're starting to experience a little bit more and more, right? So, um, it's not ever one big thing, but over that 3 year window, they've experienced a lot of different things, right? They've experienced people yelling at them. They've experienced uh, people, calling them names. They maybe have seen some, pretty violent, nasty domestics, potential suicides, homicides, stuff like that. And in my experience, what I've seen is all of that compounding stress just continues to build, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And eventually, when you hit that 3 to 5 year window, things really start to kind of hit that point where it's like, they can become a little bit more short with people at times because, this is the, umpteenth number of time that they've had to deal with the same situation. Maybe at this point, they've had some critical incidents that have kind of weighed on them a little bit. And what I've seen is it's usually in that window where guys finally are like, you know what, I've been out here enough. I've seen enough. This stuff has continued to build and compound. And at times, they get to that point where they've just said, I've had enough.
Yeah.
I'm tired of dealing with this. I'm not leaving my job, but I'm just tired of dealing with it. And we see that burnout rate, and we see where guys start to get burned out. They get bad attitudes. They maybe start making some mistakes. They're not necessarily coming with clear heads. And what a lot of people don't understand is that's 3 years to 5 years of the issues that they deal with here. That's not taking into account the 3 to 5 years of their personal problems that have happened at home, the different things that they've experienced just in their personal life, whether maybe it was life changes with a baby or a marriage or other things that naturally add stress on top of that other stress. So
Right.
it's usually in that window that I've seen where people they kind of start to go down and they decline a little bit. And in that decline is, trying to get them back out of that is where we really see some of those struggles.
I think it's also an important reminder that, to your point of like, you guys are humans, you do have a home life too. And there are home stressors too. And it does compound over time. And if you don't have the right resources to offload that and to reset yourself, then it continues to, manifest itself in different ways throughout, the entirety of your career. You have a really interesting program in place that is meant to combat that. And I would love if you could explain this program because you are the first person that I've talked to that has something like this established. And I know you're really passionate about it. And so if you're willing to share what that is, I think that'd be great.
Yep. So back in about 2018, like I mentioned, we're a town of 2,500 people. So 2018 rolls around, and we end up with a double homicide in our community. Very well known couple. Their grandson was having a crisis, was an addict, and ultimately violently killed both of his grandparents. A year later, we had a father again on having issues with chemical dependency, who set his trailer on fire and killed his daughter in doing so. Those two incidences in particular really started to build our wellness program. And then we had a third homicide a year later in 2020, or actually a fourth homicide, I should say, in 2020, where we had a mother who killed her 13-year-old daughter with disabilities. Out of all of this, though, came kind of this understanding that, we really needed to reassess what we were doing and how we were looking at things. So back in between 2018 and 2019, we started to build our wellness program. So initially out of that wellness program, we had workout on duty. We had actually created the ability for officers to go to church on duty. It was within reason. They had to be in town. They couldn't, drive an hour away to church or something like that. They still had to be able to respond. But we really tried to put a focus on that whole idea and concept of mind, body, and soul.
Mm-hmm.
And, once we got that implemented, it had some effect. It was good. Officers had the ability to go work out. So the physical fitness side of things helped. But it just seemed like we were lacking something. Mm-hmm. 2020 rolls around, and being from Minnesota, it was not a good time between the pandemic In the death of George Floyd, there was a lot of stress, a lot of things going on, a lot of cries for police reform. But we really started looking at that and saying, okay, well, what reform is actually needed.
Mhm.
I was dealing with things just personally with just the level of stress that we had a lot of things that were going on. We had just gotten through dealing with 4 homicides. Um, I was dealing with a lot of political blowback on some different things, and just the stress had kind of gotten to the point. So I was sitting in church one day, and the pastor had just come back from a 10-week sabbatical and started talking about how great it was, his ability to get away and just relax, do what he wanted, spend his time doing whatever. And it got me thinking, I'm like, if if we had an opportunity to give our staff the ability to decompress, the ability to get away from the job and completely remove themselves, what impact could that potentially have?
Mhm.
Law enforcement in general, officers, at least from my experience, have a tendency to, you know, associate and affiliate themselves really only with cops,
Mhm.
right? They get together with their buddies, they get together with cops. When they get together with cops, oftentimes it inevitably leads to conversations, and they just generally don't do a good job of taking care of themselves and disconnecting from that. So out of that came this idea of our sabbatical program, which was the ability for officers to take an entire month off. They basically, the city was going to pay them to not come to work. They didn't lose benefits. They didn't lose, their status with the department or pay or anything like that. They didn't lose PTO time or vacation time. The city was strictly going to pay them to go away, and do whatever it is that they felt was necessary to decompress, to help reduce that stress, and ultimately put their minds in a much better place. So we started out looking at it, and I had taken a week vacation at times. I'd taken 2 weeks, in the past. And I'm like, that's great. One week I came back, you come back and it's like I need a vacation because
Mhm.
it wasn't enough. 2 weeks was okay. It started to get there. So I'm like, you know what? I think a 1 month window is a good time. So we targeted that 1 month time frame. And we originally started and said, okay, let's shoot for 5 years, right? That's the top end of when we see the burnout. Let's try and look at a 5 year window to get guys that time. And as we started that program, what we found was 5 years is a long time to wait to be
Yeah.
able to take that time off. A lot of stuff has built up. So we approached our city council and said, "Hey, we need to back this off. Let's take this down to 3 years." What we did initially was I worked with my officers. We got their union on board, and we got them to build it into our union contract that this was a benefit that the city was going to provide our staff. Um, the next contract, we got it extended to where it's, the first contract was, I think, once after 5 years. The new contract reads that they get it every 3 years for an entire month.
That's
Um, the program itself is simple. I've talked with a lot of chiefs across this country, and I think I disappoint all of them because they want this like great policy, and I tell all of them it's a simple policy, that this isn't rocket science. This isn't about the department. It's about the officers. And what we did is we really focused on that. We made it simple. They get 28 days paid off by the city. We don't require them to do anything. We tell them that they don't come into the office. We let our courts and our attorneys know that the individual is off from work. They're not available. Do not call them. Do not schedule anything. They are completely unavailable. And my officers are allowed to essentially check out for that entire 28-day window. And then, from there, we just figure that if we continue to do that every 3 years, if we started to see the burnout, the theory is if we start to see the burnout at 3 years, if we're giving this to them every 3 years, they can decompress, they can let that stress hopefully reduce, but more importantly, they can decide what they need to do to reduce that stress. If they want to backpack in Europe, they can do that. If they want to go sit out on a lake and fish for 28 straight days, more power to them. And we really built it so that they could decide what was in their best interest for their mental health, to really help them refocus. And kind of going back to some of the 2020 stuff, there's a huge push in Minnesota for police reform. We have to change the way law enforcement is doing their job, right? We're doing something wrong, essentially, was the message that was out there. And we took a different approach here. And I looked at this and I said, it's not about us changing the way we're doing our job. It's really more about how we treat the people that are out there doing the job for us. My theory is that if we treat our people right, we give them opportunities to decompress, de-stress, we're going to see them, coming into work at peak performance, less having bad days and more having, the good days to be able to go out there with a clear head and serve our community. So the theory is if we take care of our people, they'll take care of our communities. And that really was kind of the driving factor of, behind our program is, let's treat them right. Let's do what we can to help them be better, help them be healthier. And in return, we're going to see the fruits of our labor out on the streets.
I love that. And how has the response been to that with your employees? Have they received that really well? Do they come back and say that it's really helped them? Have you seen an impact directly on, their performance or their decisions? How has it been received?
So I have. Being a small agency, unfortunately, we are a very small sample pool, for us. Shortly after it was implemented, while I didn't get the sabbatical, I took that month off. I'm not ashamed to say it. I was at the point where it was like, I'm tired of dealing with this. I'm done with this. It was between political pressures and other things that were going on at the time. It was like I just had enough. I dreaded coming to work. I hated the thought of, even getting out on calls because quite honestly, it was like, I knew where I was and how snippy I was going to be with people just because just the tolerance wasn't there anymore. And so I took a month off and used my own, PTO time and just said, I'm done. I'm leaving for a month. And, what I found from that was, when I came back, it was that dread, that desire of wanting to go into the office wasn't there anymore. I was able to de-stress some, not necessarily completely, but, get back to a point where, I can come back into the office. I can focus on what needs to be done and be able to do so in a manner that, served our communities better. My sergeant who has taken his sabbatical, he has, he's over that 5-year window now. He's in his 6th year. I have yet to see that burnout with him that I've traditionally seen in other officers. He reported back to me that, he thoroughly enjoyed that time off, his ability to go out and do things with his family, at the time with his fiance, that he didn't normally have the ability to do because inevitably the job would always get in the way. So, he was able to get some things done that normally would be difficult, which did 2 things. It gave him time away from here, so he didn't have that stress. He was able to bring his stress level down there, but he also didn't have the stress at home over that window because he was able to get some of those things done that normally would add stress.
Right.
I think they did some traveling and did some stuff like that. So it really helped them and helped him to really come back with a clear head. And I've yet to see that burnout in him that I've seen in other officers with his time. So,
Yeah, I love that. And I think that you're right. You have to sometimes just disconnect and reset everything and have moments to reconnect with yourself and with your family. And like I said before, you're the first person I've talked to that has a program like this in place. So it's super unique. What are you hearing from other leaders, or like what are some of the pushbacks that you're seeing from other organizations? Because I would imagine that if you're like, yes, this is effective and this is why, and it's really easy to do, there are a lot of agencies that are maybe, short or might say like, we can't afford to do this. Like, what would you say to them?
So, every agency is unique, right? I mean, no one agency is going to operate the same. No one agency has the same requirements of them. We're all a little bit different. We all function a little bit different, but ultimately our mission's the same, which is keeping our community safe and protecting the lives within them.
Yeah.
So there's with a program like this, it has to be managed. Some of the biggest pushbacks I've seen from certain agencies or different agencies is, oh, we're too big, we can't do that. Now, these are agencies that are about 50 officers. It's like, no, we wouldn't be able to do that, or our HR wouldn't allow that, or it's too cost prohibitive. I've talked with agencies our size, that are that 2,500 population, so less than 10 officers, all the way up to agencies the size of Tucson, Arizona, and Columbus, Ohio, all which we're looking at trying to implement similar programs after hearing about ours. And I've told everybody that I've ever talked to, it's the same thing, right? From the politicians, you hear the pushback of the finances. This is how I explained it to my city council. On average, we're replacing an officer every 2 years. If I give an officer 7 sabbaticals, so they're here 21 years, that is 10 officers that I would have to replace. So the average cost for us are going to be anywhere between $20,000 to $30,000 per officer to replace. So we're talking $200,000 to $300,000 minimum, just on the financial side for those officers. The other thing that you can't really quantify is 21 years of experience and knowledge, and connection to a community. Mm-hmm. So not only am I replacing it at $200,000 to $300,000, this officer, I'm also losing all of the experience, knowledge, and understanding of our community that they have. Mm-hmm. So even if we figured it cost me $10,000 a month, each sabbatical to backfill his spots, we're only at $70,000. So the reality is losing officers, because from a mental health side of things, they're unable to deal with that stress anymore. We're spending substantially more money to constantly replace and train and hire and run through that whole process. For Minnesota, the other part is if we have officers who go out on PTSD claims for Minnesota, it's a work comp claim. If I were to go out on PTSD, my employer has to maintain my medical coverage until Medicare kicks in. So if I've got a 25-year-old officer, a 30-year-old officer, we're paying, $10,000 to $15,000 a year in health insurance, that I have to pay that for the next 30 years, 35, 40 years, right? That cost becomes, exponential. Right. So the cost really isn't a factor. And what I tell most people is these are hours we budget for our staff. I'm giving them additional time off, but they're hours that we've already budgeted for. Mm-hmm. So there is no real additional cost except for a backfilling of positions. We hear, and I hear quite often about how, we can't do it with our schedule. Well, even those 50 officer departments, if they didn't do it on a 3-year and they did it on a 5-year, it has to be managed, but that's only 10 officers in any given year over that 5-year window that they're having to give off or give that time off. So it's, a lot of the negatives that people come up with really are more a fear of not willing to give it a shot and try and to see what potentially could be there. Because I think if anybody looked at it, they would realize that when you run a cost benefit analysis, right, it's the cost of doing this is minimal, but the benefit of having happy, healthy officers is exponential. I believe anyways, we'll see officers making better decisions. We'll see officers that are out there having less errors, less incidents. We're going to see less complaints coming in on those officers because they're going to be operating at a peak performance mentally. Um, Whereas without this type of a program, they're left to try and figure it out on their own.
Yeah, 100%. And I think always, being proactive about things is always going to be harder. I think getting people on board of saying, hey, like we're either going to pay for it on the front end or we're going to pay for it on the back end. And if we pay for it on the back end by losing officers because we're not prioritizing them and now they're leaving, it's going to be a much greater cost, not only financially, but like you said, like we're losing really good people who have really good experience that we may have been able to keep in this career long term if we would have had in place resources that help them to decompress, offload the stress, and be, in the end, more productive and happier, not only in their career, but also at home, which is important. And so I love that you've put together the cost and you're like, hey, like it works. Like I've done the math. And I know when we talked offline, your hope is that this is an initiative that all agencies adopt across the country and that this becomes more of a nationwide strategy. Can you maybe just give me like if you could wave the magic wand or what you would see there, by everyone being able to implement something like this, what you think that that would do?
If we could get every agency out there on board implementing some version of a sabbatical program, what I think we're going to see is we're going to see two things. One, we're going to see an increase in the longevity in careers. Some of this is based on, after 2020, we started seeing people leaving with PTSD claims in Minnesota. We started seeing people saying after 5 to 10 years, I'm done. I'm tired of dealing with this. It is too stressful. It's too difficult. And we're losing that experience. So what I think we're going to see is we're going to see those 20, 30 plus year officers out there. We're going to see that experience, that knowledge that's going to, kind of get back there. But what we're also going to see is what we didn't and haven't seen in the past, which is we're going to see officers who are performing at a level that I think, rivals when they first started, when they still had that energy, that excitement, that desire to get out there. Because they're not going to have all that built up, you know, anger, the built up stress, all of that stuff, right? They're going to have the ability to offload that stuff by just simply giving a little bit of time, right? And so I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a profession that ultimately becomes functioning at a higher level. We're going to see a reduction in the complaints across the country, I believe, anyways, because the issues that will come in are going to be those people who maybe shouldn't be in the profession anyways, and they'll be isolated to that versus somebody just flat out having a bad day who maybe's a good officer. But what I would like to believe is that also by doing this, we're going to see that average of 5 to 10 year window in which police officers traditionally die after retirement
Mm.
start to increase. We're going to see officers living longer after retirement. We're going to see them, having happier, healthier lives in general, just simply because they'll have the ability to take some of those stressors and that stress and the cortisol and everything else, and really reduce that by having the ability to get away and do those things that for them mentally and physically will benefit them.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it goes back to what you said is like longevity in the career after retirement, like how can you support that? And I know that you are of the opinion that your people are your greatest asset. So how can you put in place, things that they can do on duty, which you have, working out on duty, church on duty. I love that you said mind, body, soul. That's something that you try to integrate on a consistent basis But then when you know that those time frames are coming up for burnout, how can you offer them a reset so that you can prolong their career and you can keep them there because they are your greatest asset. So I think it's a really cool strategy. Obviously, you've had a lot of really great success in it, and I hope that it's something that can be adopted by other agencies and they'll find success in that as well. So I appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to ask you one last question. What words of advice would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known or something that's helped you along the way.
I'd probably say, don't be afraid to be open and honest with the people around you. There's that saying, oftentimes people dealing with mental health, right? They suffer in silence. And the reality is if people don't understand what you're going through, it's really difficult for them, one, to understand, but two, to potentially provide support and assistance. We don't work in a profession, law enforcement's not a profession where vulnerability and weakness are seen as signs of strength. And the reality is they should be.
Yeah.
Uh, because if you're able to be vulnerable, you're able to talk about, your struggles. Um, to me, I think it's going to give you a better opportunity to just be more open and honest about, everything in life. I mean, those, especially for guys, those are the things that, we don't talk about our feelings. It's not one of our strong suits, but having the ability to do that allows you to be more open about other things that you're seeing. And I think the public, from what I've seen, oftentimes respects that more. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is just, be open and honest, with other people, because it helps you to be open and honest with yourself too. So
I love that. I love those words of advice. I really appreciate your time. I can't believe how fast the time went, honestly. Like I blinked and it was over, but I really appreciate everything that you're doing to support your organization's wellness, and I appreciate you taking the time to share that on this podcast. So thank you for being here.
thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. And, um, I hope this helps to get the word out and more agencies can jump on board.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.